Picture this. You are a physician in ancient Alexandria. You have spent years studying medicine at the greatest library in the world, and you have just finished writing a detailed, systematic guide to preventing pregnancy. Methods, dosages, timing, which plants work, which do not, and why. Your guide will be read by doctors for the next 1,000 years. And then someone will decide that the knowledge it contains should not be accessible to women. And a different kind of erasure will begin. Not burning, not banning, but something more effective. Reclassification. The medical knowledge will remain. The context that made it useful will be systematically removed. This is the history of ancient birth control, and it is one of the most instructive examples of how knowledge gets erased not by destroying it, but by changing what it means and who it is for. Let's start with what ancient people actually knew. The answer is considerably more than the popular narrative suggests. The idea that ancient people had no reliable methods of preventing pregnancy, that women, before the modern era, simply accepted endless pregnancies as an inevitable feature of existence, is historically inaccurate. What is accurate is that the knowledge was uneven, that some methods were more effective than others, and that access to the knowledge was determined by social structures that have their own history. The most important ancient source on this subject is Soranus of Ephesus, a Greek physician who practiced in Rome in the 1st and 2nd centuries CE. His work, Gynecology, Gynaeceia in Greek, is the most comprehensive ancient medical text on women's reproductive health that survives. It covers menstruation, pregnancy, childbirth, and contraception with systematic detail that would not look out of place in a medical textbook from several centuries later. Soranus was not writing a subversive document, he was writing a medical manual for physicians. He distinguishes carefully between contraceptives, methods that prevent conception, and abortifacients, methods that end a pregnancy already established. He describes the mechanisms by which he believes various methods work. He evaluates their reliability. He notes which methods are safer and which carry risks. His contraceptive recommendations include wool soaked in various substances inserted before intercourse, cedar resin, white lead, frankincense mixed with olive oil, as physical and chemical barriers. Topical applications of pomegranate pulp, galbanum mixed with wine, or oil of cedar applied to the cervix. Timing based on the menstrual cycle. He incorrectly identifies the fertile period, but the principle of cycle-based timing is present. Oral preparations including various plant compounds. Some of these methods have no modern scientific basis. Some are directly harmful. White lead is a poison. But some have genuine pharmacological activity. Pomegranate contains estrogen compounds. Queen Anne's lace, wild carrot seed, has documented anti-implantation properties that have been studied by modern pharmacologists. The women of ancient Cyrene apparently used a plant called silphium so extensively for this purpose that the plant was driven to extinction by the 1st century CE. The demand for it was that high. Silphium deserves particular attention because it illustrates something important about the scale of ancient contraceptive practice. Cyrene, a Greek colony in what is now Libya, built its entire economy on silphium export. The plant appeared on Cyrenian coins. It was traded across the Mediterranean. Ancient writers describe it as one of the most valuable commodities in the ancient world, and multiple ancient sources specifically identify its use in preventing and ending pregnancies as the primary reason for its value. The complete extinction of a commercially traded plant due to overuse is not a minor historical footnote. It is evidence of demand on a scale that the popular narrative of passive, pregnancy-accepting ancient women simply cannot accommodate. Now let's talk about the Ebers Papyrus. The Ebers Papyrus is an Egyptian medical document dated to approximately 1550 BCE, making it one of the oldest surviving medical texts in the world. It contains, among its extensive medical content, recipes for contraceptive preparations. These include pessaries made from acacia gum, honey, and plant compounds inserted to prevent conception. Acacia gum, modern researchers have noted, breaks down to form lactic acid, which is spermicidal. The ancient Egyptians, empirically, had arrived at a preparation with genuine contraceptive chemistry. The Kahun Gynecological Papyrus, dating to approximately 1825 BCE, also contains contraceptive preparations, making it one of the oldest known documents on the subject. The knowledge was not discovered in the Hellenistic period. It goes back to at least the Middle Kingdom of Egypt. The Roman medical tradition added its own contributions. Dioscorides, the Greek physician who served with Roman armies in the 1st century CE, and whose Materia Medica remained the standard pharmacological reference in Europe for 15 centuries, documents multiple plants with contraceptive and abortifacient properties. He describes Queen Anne's lace seeds taken orally. He describes various preparations applied topically. He is a military physician writing a drug reference manual. This is not fringe knowledge. This is mainstream medical practice. The Byzantine physician Aetius of Amida, writing in the 6th century CE, compiled extensive contraceptive knowledge from earlier Greek and Roman sources. His work demonstrates that the knowledge was still being systematically compiled and transmitted in the Christian Byzantine Empire, several centuries after the Christianization of Rome. Now here is where it gets complicated, because the story is not simply ancient people knew this and then Christianity erased it. The history is more specific and more interesting than that. Early Christian writers had varying positions on contraception. Augustine of Hippo, writing in the late 4th and early 5th centuries, opposed contraception specifically within marriage on theological grounds. He believed that the purpose of sexual intercourse within marriage was procreation, and that avoiding procreation deliberately was sinful. But his argument was a theological position, not a medical prohibition. The medical knowledge did not disappear. What happened instead was a gradual transformation of the social and institutional context in which medical knowledge was transmitted. During the medieval period in Western Europe, medical education became increasingly centered in institutions connected to the church. The monastery was a center of medical knowledge. The physician trained in a context shaped by ecclesiastical values. The medical knowledge about contraception did not vanish from the manuscripts, but the manuscripts existed in libraries controlled by institutions that had theological reasons to discourage certain applications of that knowledge. The herbalists who practiced in village contexts, primarily women, working with traditional plant knowledge passed through female networks, were the practitioners most likely to transmit and apply contraceptive knowledge outside the institutional framework. They were also the practitioners most vulnerable to the accusation of witchcraft that the later medieval and early modern periods would deploy against traditional female medical practitioners. This is the connection that the popular narrative often misses. The witch trials of the 15th through 17th centuries were not primarily about superstition or mass hysteria, though both played a role. They were, in significant part, about the suppression of female medical knowledge that existed outside the institutional framework of licensed, church-connected medical practice. The Malleus Maleficarum, the 15th century witch hunting manual, specifically identifies knowledge of contraception and abortion as evidence of diabolical compact. The knowledge being suppressed was not primarily magical, it was botanical. It was the accumulated empirical knowledge of which plants, in what preparations, at what dosages, produced which effects on female reproductive physiology. It was the knowledge that Soranus had systematically documented, that the Ebers papyrus had recorded in 1550 BCE, that the pharmacological tradition had transmitted for millennia. It was also, specifically, knowledge that gave women some degree of agency over their own reproductive lives. And that is what made it dangerous to certain institutional interests. Not the knowledge itself in the abstract, the agency it enabled. Now let's talk about the modern recovery of this history. The historian John Riddle published a landmark study in 1992 called Eve's Herbs, A History of Contraception and Abortion in the West. Riddle's argument, controversial when published, increasingly supported by subsequent pharmacological research, was that ancient and medieval women had access to preparations with genuine contraceptive and abortifacient effects derived from plants that modern pharmacology has confirmed have the relevant biochemical activity. The research did not create this history, it recovered it. The manuscripts were always there, in Vatican libraries, in university collections, in museum archives. The Ebers Papyrus had been translated and published in the 19th century. Soranus' Gynecology had been available in scholarly editions. The knowledge had not been lost. It had been reclassified as ancient superstition, as primitive medicine, as the domain of ignorant village women rather than serious medical practitioners. Riddle's work changed the question, not did ancient women have any knowledge of contraception, but why did we decide they didn't? The answer to that question is the history of how knowledge gets erased. Not by burning, by reclassification, by changing the institutional context in which the knowledge is transmitted, by deciding that the practitioners of certain knowledge are not credible, by ensuring that the training of future physicians does not include certain categories of knowledge that previous generations of physicians documented systematically. The papyri survived, the manuscript survived, Soranus survived, Dioscorides survived. The knowledge was always there. Someone decided it was superstition. And for several centuries, that decision held.